My talk title today is Emanations of Love. And an emanation is a perceptible thing. It's a substance that derives from another source. And this means that it contains everything that that source has. It's sometimes easy to think about it by looking at the sun. The rays of the sun are emanations of the sun. Every sun ray contains everything that the sun has. All of life emanates from God. You could call God Source, you could call God the Tao, you could call God by many names. Whatever name you choose, it is that ineffable presence that pervades all of life. And God is love. In the Bible, in John chapter 4, verse 16, it states that God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in them. So when we are aware of the love in us, the unconditional loving presence in us, when we're aware of that, we also become aware of God. It's the same thing. So God is abiding in us, and we are abiding in God when we turn towards love. Ernest Holmes said, "Love is at the center of our being, and the calm, continuous pulsations of life are governed by love." I can't think of a better way to speak about emanation. The pulsations of life. This means everything is pulsating from God. Everything is governed by God, not some man in the clouds. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the presence, the love, the force, the field of consciousness, whatever words you want to choose to describe that unconditional, unscathed, untouched, pure love that is in all things. This also means that no matter what you've done or not done in your past, it is impossible for you to sever yourself from love. You are never separated from love. There is a part of you that is always pure love. So today I want to dive into how to tap into that kind of love and to recognize it more and more in ourselves and in the world. I want to begin by looking at the statement, I am an emanation of love. I personally am an emanation of love. So everybody say that with me now, online in person. I am an emanation of love. It can be hard sometimes to find that love inside of us because every single human being on this planet has wounds. We've all been wounded. We've all experienced some level of dysfunction in our past. I haven't met a human today that hasn't. And so we all have triggers. We all have patterns that are coming up that sometimes cause us to feel separate, to abandon that love, to turn the other way from it. But it's still in us. It's always in us. And one of the best ways that I've found that we can recognize the love in ourselves is to become familiar with the loving parent that's inside of us. Now, whether you're a parent in life to young beings or not, or have been in the past, we all have a loving parent in us, an unconditional loving parent in us. This is actually God's relationship to us. God sees us through the eyes of an unconditional loving parent. And so when you get in touch with the loving parent that is within you, then you see as God sees, you see as the loving presence within you. I have 2 children. One of my children, my oldest child, is what some might call difficult. I don't know if anyone here has had a difficult child. And as smart and intelligent and quick-witted and awesome as he really gets under my skin sometimes. He is a delight in some moments, and he is a force in other moments. And what I will say about this wonderful, perfect, beautiful soul is that he has unearthed a lot of discomfort in me. And his mood can switch like that. And when it does, I get very uncomfortable. Oftentimes when he wakes up in the morning or from naps when he was younger, he would be in a mood, and he would just be scowling, looking for anything he could to point out that was wrong. It was like everything in his view was clouded. So that's too big, that's too small. I don't want to eat any of the things you've suggested. I don't want to get up and do what you're asking me to do, right? So just everything's wrong. And for my older son, this would go on for hours. And the whole time I would be in resistance to it. I would be up against it. And I remember one day, I went to wake him up from nap, and I was standing in the doorway, and he woke up with that little scowl on his face, and I knew what was coming. And I was about ready to kind of retreat and put my walls up like I normally do. And I would usually say to him, "Hey, honey, I can see you're having a hard time right now. Why don't we reconnect when you're feeling better?" That's what I used to say to him. And I don't know that there's anything particularly wrong with that, but what I realized that day when I was standing in the doorway was that I was running away from his darkness. I wasn't able to hold it, and I wasn't able to carry it. And so it couldn't really move through him. And this is why it went on for hours and hours and hours and hours. So that day, instead of turning away from him, I said, I'm going to do something different this time. And I went and I sat right down next to him on his bed. And I said, "Hey, how are you feeling?" And he looked at me and scowled and didn't say anything. And I said, "Oh, I made a mistake. I should just get up and leave. This is not going well." And I said, No, I'm going to stay. And I said, "Okay." And I remembered that every time I wake up, every time I get up in the morning, I feel awful. I don't feel good. I feel sad. That's how I wake up every day, everyone. And I have to move through that, okay? And I'm just being really real here. And so I sat down with my little one and I said, "Hey, you know what? Sometimes when mommy wakes up, a lot of times when mommy wakes up, I feel really sad. Do you feel sad?" And then the tears came and his little lips stuck out and he was going to cry. And he was kind of holding it back a little bit and he said, "Yes, I feel sad." And I said, "Oh, honey, where do you feel that?" And he said, "Right here." And I said, "Oh, sweetie, I know, because when I wake up, that's where I feel it too." And we both started crying. And we held each other for, it was literally like 3 seconds. And then he popped right up and said, "I'm going to go play." And he was in the best mood. And I realized in that moment something very profound. All he needed was to just be seen and to be understood, and for somebody to know that everything's in its right place. Nothing needed to be fixed. He just needed to be heard. Now, this is not just true for my son and my little life. This is true for everyone who's in need of love, no matter how triggering they are. They just need to be heard. They need to be seen with compassion. And of course, this is sometimes hard to do. So I strongly recommend that we learn to be the loving parent towards ourselves first, because one of the reasons I was able to have that aha moment when I stood in the doorway was because I practice daily being loving towards what I see inside of myself. That's how I had the awareness to be able to connect that I was sharing that pain with him. I wouldn't have seen that if I didn't do my own practice in being my own loving parent first. And so how we do that is when we feel triggered and when we feel ickiness coming up and we feel uncomfortable, we get curious about our own feelings and, how am I feeling? Where is that in my body? And we don't judge, we don't shame, we don't scold. Okay, and I know this is hard. That's why the key word here is practice. And if you have kids, I know how hard it is, believe me, to not judge, shame, and scold. I know. I feel it rise up in me sometimes when they're especially overstimulating, and I have to become really aware that I'm about to do something that I might regret. So I'm not saying this is easy. This is difficult. But we can be the loving parent towards ourselves. We can practice pulling out of the discomfort and watching it, getting curious about it, and loving it, and understanding, again, that everything is in its right place. This brings me to my next point, that they are emanations of love. I want everyone to say that with me. They are emanations of love. Not the people that we like, that agree with us. They are too. But what I'm talking about right now are the people that we don't agree with, the people who we think are threatening us, threatening our livelihoods, threatening our security. They are also emanations of love. And this can be even more difficult to see. But if we practice doing our inner work, where we are able to love ourselves and be the loving parent towards ourselves, it becomes much easier to be the loving parent when we're faced with triggers outside of ourselves. Imagine again a young child having a tantrum, a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, just screaming and wailing. And in your head, you're thinking, okay, this is nonsense. Who cares? I mean, who really cares that this bar broke in half? I mean, does it really matter? You're going to bite it in half anyway in about 2 seconds. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, right? But you're just sitting there and you understand that they don't have that awareness. And you understand that they don't have the development in that moment to turn off those big, big feelings. This does not just apply to little children, my friends. This applies to adults. Not all of us grew up in loving environments. Some of us have faced great tragedy. Some of us haven't been tapped into the unconditional love that's inside of us. So when we see adults outside of us throwing tantrums, kicking and screaming, excuse me, I think I might need some water. Kicking and screaming, you want to bring that to me? The other one, the little one. Thank you. Sorry. That's my Enneagram 1 coming out. Thanks so much. So the adults, too, they're kicking and screaming, and you see them doing things that don't look like love, right? And we're going to get into this again in just a little bit. We can look at them and say, wow, I'm still going to set my boundaries. I'm still going to hold my structure. I'm going to be assertive if I need to. But can I set my boundaries, be assertive, and hold structure, and also see simultaneously that everything is in its right place? There's nothing wrong with this person. That's tough. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So again, the loving parent has to set boundaries. If a parent didn't set boundaries, what would happen to the child? Right? I'm not even going to go into that, but we've seen examples of entitlement, right? So we have to set boundaries as parents to children. We have to provide structure. But can we do that and see with clarity? And this brings me to the last point that I want to go over with everyone today, and it is that we collectively are emanations of love. We are emanations of love. Say that with me. We are emanations of love, collectively. We are collectively evolving into greater and greater expressions of unconditional love, right here and right now. In the teachings of Hasidic Judaism, and actually some of these teachings derive from Kabbalah, there is a practice of tracing wrongdoings back to its holy origin of love, the holy origin of love. So in Hasidic Judaism, when they see that there are wrongdoings in the world, or some may call these acts evil, what they do is they practice tracing it back to love. When love is expressed through a human vessel, an individual consciousness, it doesn't always look like what we would judge as love. Love can sometimes express as deviated, demented, even perverse. It depends on the individual it's being expressed through. But we are never, never separated from source. Even in our acts of ignorance, love is still there. As John so beautifully read earlier, love within us cannot be destroyed, but it can be ignored. We feel it to the degree that we are aware of it. If we abandon love, then it'll feel like love has abandoned us. And unconditional love is trying so desperately to work through all of us right now. And it just depends on our own history, our own background, our own makeup as to how this love comes out. So this is a teaching in Hasidic Judaism. And it helps me remember that all is still love, no matter how it shows up. We can support the spiritual evolution and awakening of humanity to unconditional love when we choose not to lose sight of love. Again, this doesn't mean that we don't set boundaries. It doesn't mean that we excuse behaviors. It doesn't mean any of that. But can we do all of that and simultaneously hold the higher vision, hold the higher view that love is still there, that everything ultimately is in its right place? When we hold space as an unconditional, loving parent holds space for its child, for their child, then I believe that we have a profound impact on allowing that awareness to quicken for humanity, to collectively rise faster in terms of how we see unconditional love and experience unconditional love. So don't let what we're seeing in the world today influence your perception of love or your belief in where we can go in love as a human race. Heraclitus, who is my favorite pre-Socratic philosopher, said, "They do not apprehend how being in conflict, it still agrees with itself. There is an opposing coherence as in the tensions of the bow and the lyre." I'm going to read that one more time because it's very important. They do not apprehend how being in conflict, it still agrees with itself. There is an opposing coherence as in the tensions of the bow and the lyre. What Heraclitus is saying, and many Greek philosophers shared this view, ancient Greek philosophers, there is a harmony in tension, there is a unity in conflict, and there is love in wrongdoing. This is the paradox that we are being called to hold in our bodies, in our minds. And of course, it takes practice. Again, this is not easy. But every single individual that feels called today to start practicing this, I urge you to do so. Practice being the loving parent towards yourself, towards the other, and towards all of humanity. The past few years, I've watched families, I've watched our country, I've watched our world fraction off and cling to opposing ideologies so tightly that we can't hear each other anymore. I have seen parents sever relationships with their children. I have seen the media condemn and demonize people. I have seen politicians on both sides spew rhetoric that is opposing and contributing to the polarization that we're seeing today. I can feel the tension in my body when I witness it. I don't know about you. But if I stay with that tension long enough, at first it feels like a sort of death, like things are coming to an end. But it's not a death. It's an opening. It's a portal. It's an opening to something bigger, something greater. It's an opening to a higher order. It's an opening to love, to true love, to unconditional love. Tension and opposing forces are necessary to contain our solar system. Tension and opposing forces are necessary to give birth to new life. Our entire evolution has depended on and continues to depend on chaos, tension, and conflict. We are moving from one level of chaos right now to a higher order, a higher love. And what Heraclitus was saying is that the tension we're experiencing right now is part of the birth. So if you can hold that vision, then you are seeing through the eyes of the loving parent. Imagine for a second, or maybe longer, I don't think this is going to take a second. Imagine for a little bit that our entire life, not just humans, but the entire life, the entire world, the entire planet Earth runs for 5 hours, okay? From the dinosaurs to us now to whatever we become. It runs for 5 hours, okay? What we're experiencing right now, the polarization we're seeing, the tensions we're feeling, the way we're bumping up against each other is a nanosecond in those 5 hours. And as human beings, we oftentimes get stuck in what we can see in the limited time of the nanosecond. But God is beyond time and space. God sees way more than the nanosecond. God sees the full 5 hours. So when we learn to be the loving parent and we tap into the love of God within us, we also have the ability to see the full 5 hours. And we get to see how the 5 hours are a beautiful expression of love. And I invite you today to rest in that truth. If you can't quite feel it yet, rest in the idea of it. Because it's a hard thing to get to, I know. I've been there, I've walked that path, and I know it's tough. So even if you can't quite rest fully or grasp how the full 5 hours of this world is an expression of unconditional love, just rest in the idea that that's possible. And this, again, is how we open that portal little by little. If we just start to practice being the loving parent to ourselves, to each other, to humanity, and again, we set our boundaries, we say what we need to say, we don't excuse any behavior that's harmful, we take care of ourselves, but simultaneously understand, it's very paradoxical, that everything is in its right place. Everything. I invite you to practice seeing all things as the loving parent. If you feel moved or called today, take out a journal when you get home or a piece of paper and write down, who am I as the loving parent? How do I show up in the world as a loving parent? And journal about it. What does your version of the loving parent look like? How would you parent? What kind of boundaries would you set? When would you relinquish those boundaries? And if it serves you, if you're having a particular tough time with someone or some idea, journal about how you would be the loving parent ideally to that person or to that situation. And then practice as best you can joining with that parent. It's going to be messy, that's okay, but practicing it is better than not practicing it, right? So I encourage you all today and invite you all into this practice. When we see humanity through the eyes of this parent, we contribute to creating a world that looks more like pure, unscathed, untouched love.